Good morning.
Good morning.
Our stoic crew of hardcore Zennies this morning. Glad to have you. Grateful to be able to celebrate this week with you. It's here we have a rare, glorious, clear blue sky and a bright sun overhead. And that's not something we see a lot in Northeast Ohio in the winter.
Nope.
I remember one time being particularly frustrated with the reality of our weather existence and looking up days of sunshine, right? Where has the most sunshine? Where has the least? And my hometown was right next to Juneau, Alaska.
Yep.
Which is remarkable considering Alaska has whole months of darkness.
Yep.
It's like 40% sunny days.
Like Northeast Ohio and England are the two most dreary countries on the planet. England and Scotland.
It's quite delightful. So when we get these clear sunny days, it just is a delight.
Be slightly happier if it was above 20 degrees.
Oh, stop it. So picky. Ryan's so picky. He wants it to be sunny and warm. That's
Yes.
ridiculous.
Sunny and warm.
Sunny and above freezing. What kind of ridiculous requirements for life is that? One of the things that we said we were going to talk about this week was Mondo. And so I would be remiss if I didn't open our spiel with Mondo. Now, by definition, Mondo is a way of dialogue. So it would be entirely ironic for me to wax lyrical about Mondo for an extended period of time. Let's just name that. So what I'd like to say about Mondo is that the idea of Mondo being a part of Zen training is as ancient as Zen itself. The notion of having a dialogue between a teacher who gets it and a student who doesn't, from time immemorial, is the way that spiritual teachings worked, especially in East Asia. Okay. And then that evolved and became very sophisticated as one of the main teaching mechanisms in Chan. So in Indian Buddhism, the same process was done in the form of public debate. And public debate still plays a huge role in Vajrayana Buddhism. In Chan, it became more of a direct kind of teacher-student dharma combat. And it wasn't so much a public debate as it was a sincere inquiry and the teacher holding an awakened perspective, responding to that inquiry from that awakened perspective. And what was passed down to us was so many times where that resulted in a significant insight on behalf of the student. Okay? They don't record the millions of hours of teaching that didn't result in a significant insight. Okay, so let's just remember that. The stories are presented like, oh, there was this one-line exchange and it was quippy and all of a sudden bang. Well, the student had been a monk for who knows how long by the time that happened, and how many times has he heard the exact same freaking thing from the teacher before he finally got it, right? So, but this is a key part of it, that really strong personal relationship between teacher and student and the dialogue about practice. Okay? So that's what it started out as, and that's what it remained within the esoteric hidden container of the Dokusan or Sanzen room. Okay? And there's a difference between Dokusan and Sanzen. So Dokusan is or dealing with Koan work, or dealing with life practice, dealing with like the experience of being a Zen student. Sanzen is specifically in Sesshin when we go and we talk about meditation practice. Okay. So for those of you who hollow bones, we don't make such a clear distinction, and sometimes that's great, and sometimes we could benefit from a clear distinction on what we're going to talk about. However, so what evolved over time is this thing called Koan study, or the Hwato. And so Mondo started using these enigmatic phrases as the kind of the starting point for the teacher-student exchange. right? So basically it was like, okay, let's take the Joshu's moo, right? Okay, so the monk asks Joshu, does the dog have Buddha nature? And Joshu says, moo. Ah! Okay? And so it was like the process of trying to get inside Joshu's perspective is Zen practice, is koan study. Right? And so what would happen is we're going to take this case that presents an awakened perspective and we're going to use that as the basis for how we do our teacher-student dialogue. And this is how koan study works. Okay. Now koan practice is a little bit different, but that's the idea of koan study. Now koan practice, you go and you take that into samadhi, you go deep into samadhi, and then you infuse your samadhi with the flavor of the koan, usually in the form of a single word or phrase from the koan. It's called huato, right? And so you would come into samadhi and you would say, Mu. And the idea isn't to chant mu to get into samadhi. The idea is to infuse samadhi with the nature of mu so that it shows you all of the places that you're stuck. And then in the process of going back and forth with your teacher, what you're really doing is you're showing all the places where you can't detach from your conceptual mind and all the places that you're hooked. And your teacher is systematically unhooking you from all of your attachments and worldviews. Okay? It's basically the four, right? That's not the whole thing, but that's basically what's going on. So over time, they developed this really elaborate system and structure of about 1,700 koan that were used to take somebody from, I don't know anything about Buddhism or Zen or practice, through to enlightened master. Okay. And in our lineage then, what happened was that Junpo completed his koan training under Edo Shimano, and just for perfect transparency, that consisted of about 180 koan. They didn't go anywhere near 1,700 koan, in part because Edo didn't do them all, and in part because they philosophically believed that that was just extra. There wasn't that much new shit in the other 1,600 koan that they really needed to work on, right? Maybe that's true, maybe that's arrogance, we don't know. I haven't been through the whole system, so I can't tell you. When Junpo left the monastery, part of his mission was to take Zen practice and bring it more into American culture, make it more accessible for Americans. And a lot of these koan are completely unintelligible to the Western mind because they were conducted in a foreign language with a foreign worldview and a foreign understanding and a basis of knowledge that most Americans don't have. And like for an American to do classical koan study, you have to become an expert in traditional Chinese and Japanese culture. Otherwise, you just can't understand what they're talking about. When they're talking about vertical and horizontal and the symbolic meanings of being in a tree or being chased by a tiger, we don't have the worldview that makes sense of those turns of phrase. So the koan study just doesn't make sense. Okay. So anyway, what he did, and he worked with Edo quite closely on this, is he reformulated the major steps, the major milestones of koan practice into what we call the Mondo Zen koan practice. Okay. And now what we've done is we've taken the organic teacher-student dialogue about the Dharma and about practice that it originated as and codified it into like a script or an initiation rite for this is the basics of Zen, this is the basics of Buddhism, this is the basics of the awakening process. And so then the teacher or the facilitator, whatever you want to call it, I still like teacher because that's the role. And if we don't develop a teacher-student relationship and we don't care about what the teacher says, then when the teacher corrects us, it doesn't have any weight and we don't benefit from the container, right? So if we're not willing to subjugate ourselves to some sort of hierarchy and say this person knows more than me, then we're not going to benefit. And especially a lot of us don't like that now. We're very green, very social, very equitable. No, we're all Buddhists of no rank. No, you're not, all right? You're just not. So anyway, so in the container we recognize, even if we don't necessarily believe it, we give authority to the teacher. Because without giving over that authority, what they say doesn't matter. Right. Okay, so then we enter this container and we go through this script. And people do Mondo differently. Mondo Zen koan practice, there are people who are really highly scripted and they just go back and forth reading the book and they have a meditative container. And it's the process of reading the book in a meditative container for 4 to 6 hours that has a transformational impact. The content of the Mondo Zen manual is quite good. I wouldn't say that it's like the best piece of literature about spiritual awakening that has ever been written, but it hits all the major parts. It's very good. And specifically, the main part is that we introduce the emotional koan to students right away. Okay, so normally the precepts koans are at the end of training, because to understand the precepts, we have to first have had an experience of wisdom. Without insight, it's very difficult to correctly understand the precepts, and so precept study goes last. So students may go, 15 or 20 years before they start doing precepts work, really. They do a little bit of it to take jukai, right? But to really get into the precepts as koan, it's at the end of the curriculum usually. So one of the things that Junpo did was he reformatted the idea of precepts koan along with Hoffman process and current psychological methods and the understanding of embodied wisdom from yoga and all these things, and put that in the second part of the Mondo. So koan 1 through 10 are about wisdom. They're about descending into nothingness and realizing its fullness, right? About samadhi, about non-dual insight. So that's koan 1 through 10. And then koan 11 through 13 are about, okay, well, how do we apply that? How do we use that to deconstruct and further reconstruct an ego process that's aligned with the wisdom that we understood in the first 10 koan. So in a way, it's get a taste, try and live this taste, and then the idea is that you keep going through it. You go through the Mondo Zen koan practice over and over and over and over again, because we're not holding any student to well, you're not getting the first koan, so until you do, we're not doing the second one. We don't do that. We do all 13 over and over and over again. And the idea is, okay, we're on an upward spiral, right? Or descending spiral, right? Either way. And we get a taste, we apply that taste. By applying that taste, we open ourselves up to a deeper taste, we can apply the deeper taste, and so on. And that forms kind of the energetic addition to our practice. So that's basically what Mondo is. Like I said, it has 2 parts. The first part has 10 koan, the second part has 11, 12, 13, 3 koan. That was not always true. At some points, the second part had 16 koan. It changed a lot over Junpo's life. And if he was still alive, it would probably have changed again 2 or 3 times over the last couple of years. He worked on it for 20 years, and there are 20 versions of it, which is, I think, important for us to remember about the evolving nature of insight. Right? His own insight was evolving. Okay, so anytime we get stuck in thinking that there is a system that can be readily applied, then we're missing a huge part of the evolutionary nature of the human experience. Anyway, there's my introduction. Hopefully it was an adequate introduction to provide some energy for a conversation. We have about 20 minutes left, a little less, to open it up to dialogue around Mondo or anything else that arises. Thanks.
So always done teacher to student. So if you were to take,
No.
So if you were to take solo study, what's the best approach there? Obviously we're here,
Right.
That could easily be a thing. But if I were to say, okay, well, there's my taste, and if I'm going to dig deeper into that on Tuesday morning,
Yeah.
what's the best practice there, the best approach there, the best?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So there's a couple things about it. One is, because the Mondo Manual does have a very complete script, it also gives, if you know how to look for it, very detailed instructions on how to walk yourself through the awakening process. Okay? And so if you're going to conduct koan study and Zen practice, first off, I would never say that anyone could do Zen practice without some sort of teacher-student relationship. I think that that's absolutely essential. However, the huge majority of practice is done entirely on one's own, in one's own interior direction, because a huge part of Zen is that no one can give you an experience. You have to go have the experience yourself. And no matter what experience you have, and no matter how articulate you become, you can never share that experience with anyone else. I could never know, even if I sat here for 5 days straight and just talked about all of the aspects of awakening that I've experienced in my spiritual lifetime, it would mean absolutely jack shit to y'all.
Right.
Right. Okay. So, if you're going to work with the Mondo Zen Koan as and clarification, I usually say koan, not koans, because koan is a loan word from an Asian language, and it is both singular and plural.
So like half of Japanese.
Right, so like koan.
So koans is not a thing. Koan is also the individual and the all-encompassing.
Right, yeah. Now, most people don't do that. They just say koans because we're English speakers, but I just want to be clear. When I'm saying koan, I can mean one or multiple.
Okay.
So you take a koan, preferably in order, and you sit with it until you feel like you really got it. So the way that would look is like the instructions for the first koan are to listen. And the prompting question is there, what's the current version? Is there a depth of pure listening? Or is it possible to purely listen with no opinion? I think is the current version. And so you would take that question and you would contemplate that question for a while. You would come into your sit and you would bring yourself to listen. And you would be pointing yourself to the qualities of listening. Listening deeper than an opinion. And if you look under the main header, there's some checking questions like, is this mind deeper than anything that arises within it? Right? And so you walk yourself through those questions one by one using the focus of listening, the experience of listening, to deconstruct the insights that it's pointing to. And to really do it, you might sit with, is it possible to just listen with no opinion as your koan question for months? And your whole point is to take in the inquiry. And Bo Shan has this great book called Great Doubt. Okay, so great doubt is one of the cornerstones of Zen practice. You have to maintain an attitude that you don't get it. Whatever you get isn't it.
I mean, it's not a difficult attitude to take some days.
Some days, and other days we feel very certain. Right?
Yeah.
And so, especially when we have a powerful awakening moment, we go, I get it. Yes, that. Right? And the Koreans take this so extreme that they might work one hwato for their entire life. They never sit with anything other than whatever their initial hwato was that was given to them by their teacher based on the intuition of what koan that student really needed. Right? And they will just work that to the absolute depth of insight, to the full completest degree. And no matter where they wander in their studies, when they sit with that koan. Right? Great doubt. It's a beautiful element to our practice. But yeah, so you would do that, and then when you feel like you've really got it, then you would go to the next koan. And then you would go to the next koan. And so you might walk yourself through the koan manual over, it might take 10 years to do 10 koan at a depth that you're satisfied with. And then you got 11, 12, 13 too.
So what happens when you're not satisfied?
You keep sitting.
That's personally, I would say I don't want to call it hang up necessarily, but when you look at something like, you bring up great doubt. So, okay, I could sit with this for 6 months. Go, all right, I think I've poked it from about every angle that I could possibly poke it. I think I have it. Always gonna be that. But do you?
Yeah. Well, this is where working with a teacher comes in really handy.
Right. So where do you draw the line there and say like, okay, like you've poked that enough? Is there a point where you go, okay, let's maybe set this aside, come back to it. It's not going anywhere. Move on to the next. Just personal.
Totally personal unless
experience.
you're working with a teacher. So if you give somebody the authority to say, yeah, you've got it well enough, go to the next koan. Then you're kind of like you're outsourcing that decision making and you're trusting somebody else's experience, which is one of the great benefits of having a teacher in koan study. But otherwise, there's no reason you can't do it on yourself, and you have discipline to be able to really do that. I would argue that many modern Americans do not necessarily have the discipline to do that in self-study, and so that's just important to know. And then there's also, there's benefit to just grabbing a friend and alternating reading the manual and pretend facilitating each other. just so that you can externalize part of the process. It's just important to know that it should feel remarkably different from sitting across from somebody who's a deep Zen practitioner, right?
Just Steve from down the block.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
like, because, it's part of our lineage too that, like, if you farted on the Mondo manual once, you can facilitate somebody. And I don't know how much I agree with that opinion, but it's true that being facilitated, even if the facilitator has very little basis of experience, can be a very powerful practice.
Okay.
So, grain of salt, but people do it, and it seems to matter.
I would
I-
like to, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I would like to ask because, what you first shared, this going through it 1 to 10 and then 11, 12, 13 over and over again is much quicker than what you just shared right now. So how you can do koan practice on your own. And also this understanding of that first you must sit and be in deep meditation and then start with the koan practice. I guess these are two major points which are maybe sometimes misunderstood from many students of ours. So like what would you say, how is that, how is it beneficial to go through it that in the quick way instead of in the deep dive way?
Yeah. So there's a few elements to that, and first, I'll take your second question first. So you can use the Huato as a mantra to bring you into meditation. And the way that works is you use the Huato listen, 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 until listen feels annoying. And then you drop it, and then you're in silence. Well, now you've gone from concentration to meditation. So listen, act as your vehicle of concentration. Then you drop it and you end up in meditation. And then after a little bit, if you're going to do this work, then once you're in meditation, then you bring listening back up. And the focus of the meditation is now the experience of listening. You're investigating the process of listening from within meditative mind. And that's when you're really doing koan work. Before that, you were just doing mantra meditation.
Rather than the spoken or the internalized listen,
Right.
listen, or no mind, or no, or whatever. Then silence, then concept rather than construct.
Correct. Gotcha. Yeah. And so that's the second part. Okay. The first part is that one of Junpo's teachings is that once you got it, and this is the thing that people have varying degrees of interpretation over. Well, what does it mean to get it? Right? Sometimes it's just you've been through it once, and it's still beneficial to do this. It's beneficial to do this no matter what, because if you don't have a philosophical orientation for your practice, then your practice has nothing to hang its hooks on, and so it's very hard to integrate. And so a key part of Junpo's teaching was called the Mondo Dharani, and that would be like, on an inhale, where? Or listen, where? Heart, compassion. Who am I? I don't know. Who am I? Not knowing. Where am I? Koan. Oh, and then what do we got? Fearless, empty, silent, timeless, imperturbable, vast, eternal, still, peaceful, aware. And then what's the one for Koan 6? Show me. Yeah. And then call and response, and then I choose my response, or something like that. It's in the back of the book. I haven't done it in like 5 years.
So this is done solo?
This is done like a mantra meditation, as a concentration vehicle. And the point of it, and despite my incredibly botched presentation of it, the point is to go click, 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 click through the philosophical framework over and over and over again, and anchoring the concepts and recalling the experiences that you have had in each koan over and over and over again, to deepen those grooves in your consciousness so that they're more readily available than the less helpful philosophical orientation that we may be living from. Right? So it's more just like building the neural connections to be like, does this come and go? No, this cannot come and go. Right? And you just know that. And that becomes the dominant philosophy by which you live your life, instead of the notion of like, well, sometimes I get it, and sometimes I don't, and sometimes I'm in meditative mind, and sometimes I'm not, and sometimes I'm special, and sometimes I'm not. It's like, no, it's just here. It's here. No, here. It's not there. It's here. Here. Does this mind come and go? No, it's here. Always here. You can never leave this mind. Period. Done. Right? And so you want to deepen that cosmic groove, and then that makes it so that you truly never leave this mind. You know? And so doing it repeatedly, doing it over and over again, doing it as a Dharani, has the benefit of just carving the channel. And then as you have experience, that channel can hold more water, and then it becomes a river to the ocean instead of, you know, a trickling stream that dies out after 5 feet.
Gotcha.
Does that help? Was that addressing your question?
Yes, it does. It does. Wonderful.
Great.
Thank you.
Good question.
Good answer.
Thanks.
Good Mondo.
Anything jiving for you, Marie?
I'm good.
Swaha. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left, which is enough for one more inquiry, if anyone has anything.
I'll always have something.
Yeah, I have something. Or do you want? Right.
Please. I'll talk for hours if you don't stop me.
Okay, so where's the big difference in emotional Koan work and psychotherapy or coaching?
It depends on how deep one's awakening is.
How so?
So if one is still enraptured with the phenomena of mind, in other words, if one is still entangled with relative conditioned processes, then the only work that can be done is psychotherapy, because there's no space outside of the ego consciousness that the person can inhabit or view ego consciousness from. Now, emotional koan work is, as far as I can tell, I mean, while it has its place in Buddhism and Zen and yoga and Tantra in general, Iyengar's work, especially Light on Yoga or Light on Life, talked about this in a way that readily resonates with Junpo's teaching, and because Junpo was BKS Iyengar's student, it's hard for me to not draw a correlation between how this practice evolved. And what that's basically saying is that in deep meditative space is nonverbal. It's a direct experience of what's happening. And it's not even a symbolic experience of what's happening, because basically what happens is we have a verbal narrative about our experience, okay? And then we have the symbolic representation of our experience, which is still ultimately a thought pattern. And then we have the direct sensory experience. Okay, and so what we're looking at is the direct sensory experience. To get to the level of direct sensory experience, absent of any cognitive framework that's interpreting that experience, is this deep form of samadhi, a deep form of meditation. And if you can't do that, then whatever you're doing is psychotherapy, because you're still working within your conceptual framework. So in the emotional koan, if you read it very carefully, it invites you to get deep enough into the direct sensations of the body to release whatever contractions are held in the body, and then from that release there will be an upswelling of released energetic, emotional, and cognitive information that from meditative mind we witness. That witnessing of that upswelling of information that comes from the released somatic contraction is the wisdom of the emotional koan. That then tells us exactly what we need to do. So it's predicated on the sense that if we go deep enough, our system already knows exactly what the correct answer is. We already know. We're just blocked from knowing because we're wrapped up in our thoughts, emotions, and sensations, perceptions. Okay. So that's how emotional koan is functionally both, depending on the depth of detachment that one has to their experience.
Exquisite. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And with that, we are at time for today. So I will closing check in with, as always,